with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. While he was praying, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were conversing with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions had been overcome by sleep, but becoming fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As they were about to part from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But he did not know what he was saying. While he was still speaking, a cloud came and cast a shadow over them, and they became frightened when they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my chosen son, listen to him." After the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They fell silent and did not at that time tell anyone what they had seen. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Today's Gospel, during the second Sunday of Lent, the Church invites us to contemplate the Transfiguration of the Lord, a very significant event in the journey of Jesus on his way to Jerusalem, by which he will give his life. And for this occasion, Jesus takes 3 of his disciples, his apostles, the closest to him, to take him on the journey to Mount Tabor to witness the transfiguration of the Lord when his face changed. The Gospel of Luke, immediately, the transfiguration comes immediately after Jesus' invitation to the apostles. "If any man should come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." After Jesus said this, then he took the 3 to the mountain for the transfiguration. That is a very significant perspective, a point, because Jesus is trying to let him know this is part of the way to the cross. As part of the cross, we need to see always the transfiguration in context of the suffering of the Lord. The preface for today's Mass reminds us that for after he had told his disciples of his coming death, on the holy mountain he manifested to them his glory to show that the passion leads to the glory of the resurrection. The passion leads to the ultimate resurrection, but what Jesus gives the apostles is a foretaste of the resurrection. So they can see his divinity, so that they can survive, as it were, their faith not be lost when they see the Lord through his passion, death, and ultimately to his resurrection. So taking them to the mountain to see is a way to welcome him into his exodus. As Jesus says, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus, that is, of his path to freedom from death. Remembering the Exodus, Moses frees the people of Israel from slavery, and out of Egypt and brings them into the land that the Lord had prepared for them. But what we see here is Jesus beginning his exodus at the Transfiguration, and he will continue his exodus in many ways. This passage finds a parallel passage in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I'll point to some of the significant things that the Gospel of Luke points to. One is that the face of Jesus changes and his clothes become dazzling white in the presence of Moses and Elijah. A symbol that he is God amongst us. He is God. And he transfigures himself and shows his divinity as he was intended to be. He doesn't bring a new law, but he is part of the continuation all the way from the Old Testament to the New Testament in Jesus Christ. Always seeing the continuation from Genesis to the coming of Jesus all the way to the book of Revelation, always seeing that it's the same plan of God. This is the chosen Son. This is the one that's been given to us, and the one that will give his life for us, for our own salvation. We see Moses quickly, when he saw when he saw Moses and Elijah take leave of the Master, Peter says, "Lord, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He wants to stay there because it is a significant encounter with the Lord. A very deep encounter, but a brief encounter. I like to dwell on that a little bit more. Every encounter with the Lord, to authenticate it as an encounter with the Lord, is brief, but the memory of it lasts for a lifetime. All of us have had an encounter with the Lord at one point or another. All of us have seen him and felt him in our hearts in one point or another. And it never seems to last. The temptation is to think that it should last always. But in this world or in this life, it's not going to last as long. Like the Transfiguration was an instant. It is significant, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, that Peter, James, and John were drowsy. They were falling asleep. They couldn't contain their sleep. The same thing happened in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus keeps insisting to stay awake, and they kept falling asleep. It's the temptation that we all have, my brothers and sisters. When we're in this world, sometimes we don't realize the presence of the Lord amongst us, or the presence of the Lord in our hearts, or the presence of the Lord out there, because we're drowsy with the things of this world. St. Paul describes it in the second reading to us this way, that sometimes we often are distracted, and our minds are occupied with earthly things. Isn't that true, my brothers and sisters, that most of the day, if not every day, we just distracted with earthly things? We hardly think about the Lord and what he has promised us in eternal life. The Lenten season is an opportunity for us to connect once again with our eternity, to what God has in plan for us, to begin to put things in context in regards to our eternal salvation. As I said before, the things that were attached, the things we're going to detach from in order to facilitate our salvation for all eternity. But we find ourselves asleep, like the apostles. In many ways, how much time do we dedicate to prayer? It tells us the gospel that Jesus went to the mountain to pray, to speak to God. And for the most part, we got all the things in our mind, very few time for the Lord. So it is important that during this Lenten season, we review the amount of time that we spend in prayer, as opposed to just going through the motions. If we want to have a significant encounter with the Lord, like the transfiguration, to his resurrection and our soul be inspired, we need to spend time with him. It cannot just happen by accident, because sometimes the Lord, in his grace, he pushes himself forward so that we can see him. But it needs to be not by inertia, but a conscious effort. That's what sleepness makes me think about. When we're asleep, our bodies minds just go on their own. They don't require much effort. You dream what you dream. And your body recuperates, but it's just in a state of passivity. For many of us, we do the same thing with our spiritual life. We're just going through the motions, and we're just going passively, making very little effort to have a significant relationship with the Lord. Maybe pray here, maybe a prayer there, but if we look honestly inside our hearts, we will find that 23 hours and 50 minutes we're just preoccupied about earthly things. Which is, for the most part, the average person. If they pray 2-3 minutes a day, but we don't dedicate the amount of time, but we want an encounter with the Lord. Perhaps we wonder, where is the Lord that we haven't felt his presence? Where is he? He's just a prayer away. To find time to pray is important for our life, that we do take time aside to pray. That we find no other distraction, but just a time to contemplate his face. Contemplate the face of the Lord. The disciples who witnessed the scene were falling asleep, but they looked at the face of Jesus, and then they recognized Moses and Elijah, and then they wanted to stay there. Jesus challenges them and says, no, you have to go back to Jerusalem, where he will suffer. That's our journey with the Lord. To encounter him and to spend time with him. And I will say, alone with him. Spend time alone with Jesus. After the voice had spoken, the gospel says, Jesus was found alone. We're looking for a spiritual highs, as it were. We're trying to detach ourselves or escape from this world so that we can connect with God. But the Lord wants to connect with us in the simple realities of everyday life. The simple, right where we're at, that's what the Lord wants to be. He wants to be with us during our drive. He wants to be with us at work. He wants to be with us when we're at play, when we are sad, when we're going through different things in life. He wants to be part of all that. That means that we need to sparkle our lives constantly with the presence of the Lord to continue to refresh us, as opposed to wait until we have time for him, or until I feel the right thing. It is a discipline, prayer, but it's a very simple discipline, something that can be done just by the desire of the will to be connected with the Lord. We don't think of a life of consolation with the Lord and the presence with him always, because when we go to the Lord in heaven, when the Lord takes us to himself, we will contemplate him for all eternity, and we will love him always. But in this life, the Lord gives us foretastes. Those small but precious moments of time with him, if we only make the time. I think of many saints who only experience the presence of the Lord or saw his face once, 3, 4 times in a lifetime. And those encounters with Jesus were so deep that made them missionaries, made them give their life completely to the mission of the church, and many of them died martyrs, just by having precious, deep encounters with Christ. We cannot just remain half asleep in our spiritual journey and expect to become holy and saints automatically or overnight. It takes time for the effort. But when the Lord gives us the gift of His presence, to feel His presence in our life, then we yearn for Him more. And yearning from Him more makes us go out beyond what we thought that we could ever do. An example that I like to mention is Saint Teresa of Calcutta. After she passed and her diaries were revealed, it showed years and years of a dark night to the soul that she was undergoing. The interesting thing, she kept her diary, her letters directed at Jesus and speaking to Him, even though she could not feel His presence. Earlier in life, on various occasions, she experienced the presence of Jesus, the face of Christ. She experienced Him. And that filled her heart with joy. How do we know that it was the real Jesus that she felt in her heart? By the fruits of her work. See, what happened with her is that when she experienced the closeness with Christ in her youth, that memory moved her to keep searching for His face, whatever her face would be. That led her to meditate on the chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew, when she saw that in order to see the presence of Jesus, she said, I have to help those who are most in need. Because Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, whenever you help one of the little ones like this, the poor, the sick, the homebound, the imprisoned, whenever you help one of these little ones, you help me. Jesus reassured her that by seeking the face of Jesus in the poor, she will be able to see Jesus and care for Him. That's what a memory of a transfiguration does to us. When we have deep encounters with the Lord in prayer, they will lead us into mission. To do something for the church, to do something for our community, to do something for the most vulnerable. It cannot lead us to a contemplative state, but we're just going to look at the ceiling. To know that the encounter with Christ is authentic, it always leads us to acts of charity. Always. To go beyond what we want to do and to do what the Lord is calling us to do. We entrust ourselves to the Virgin Mary and ask her to help us to live intensely our moments of encounter with the Lord so that we may follow Him joyfully every day of our lives. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.